about today. And of course, I want to thank you for having me, especially Summerlee and Conference of Southwest Foundations, as well as Earth Island. So, what is the reality behind the films? We're going to see a clip from A Fall from Freedom. You've seen The Cove. Some of you have seen The Cove, and Blackfish is out. And the question is are these documentaries based upon scientific evidence regarding who dolphins and whales really are? Well, since this is a very quick presentation, I'm going to cut to the chase right now and tell you that there are 2 points I'd like to make based upon my experience working dolphins and whales for over 20 years and the scientific literature. One point I want to make is that dolphins and whales are the kinds of beings that actually make them especially vulnerable to the effects of captivity. And I will tell you a little bit more about why I think that. And the bottom line is that cetaceans, dolphins, and whales don't seem to be able to flourish or thrive in captivity. Now, what are those characteristics I'm talking about? Well, dolphins and whales possess characteristics that you and I possess as well. And those characteristics make us very vulnerable to suffering in captivity, and it's the same for them. They are autonomous beings. They are self-aware. We know this from the fact that they recognize themselves in mirrors. They're able to think about their own thoughts. There's a lot of science on this. They're individuals. They have very close emotional and social bonds. They can reflect upon their own thoughts, and yes, you can actually probe that experimentally. And they are aware of others. Now, you recognize this list as being a list of characteristics that we possess, and that if you're that kind of being, you are not going to do well in captivity. So let me just run through some of the things we know about who dolphins and whales are from the abundance of scientific evidence. First of all, dolphins and whales in general have disproportionately large and complex brains, and I'm happy to address any questions that you might have about that. I've studied brains of stranded individuals for 20 years now, and I can tell you that it is really, they are brains to write home about. So they have very large convoluted brains, as we do. They recognize themselves in mirrors. They are aware of their own body. They can imitate. They, as I said, have something called metacognition. In other words, they can report on how certain they are that they know the answer to a question. And I could talk about how we actually probe that. They are enormously socially complex, and they have very strong social and emotional bonds. They are cultural beings. There is now established from fieldwork that there are cultures that transmit across the generations. They are tool users. They have different dialects, and they can share resources. So they're cultural beings as well as being socially complex. And then finally, they seem to have some capacity for altruism or perhaps even empathy across species. Here you see a beluga whale who actually is pulling someone up to the surface who fell into the tank. And that beluga whale knew exactly what to do to get this other air-breathing mammal to the surface to breathe. They collaborate with each other, and they cooperate. So, just as humans possess the intelligence and the self-awareness to experience captivity in a certain way, it appears to be the same for them. What is captivity like for both humans and cetaceans? Well, it's a life of thwarted goals. If you're an autonomous being with self-awareness, then you have goals and objectives, and those are thwarted in captivity. You have no control over your life. You lack stimulation and challenge. You actually want challenge. You don't want someone to feed you the same thing all the time. You want the challenge of making your way in life. And if you're an orca or a dolphin, you want that. You have to suffer broken relationships and very often the loss of will to live. This is a pilot whale who is in captivity, and he repeatedly tries to get out of his tank. Cetaceans cannot thrive in captivity, regardless of the intentions or how good the facility is. That's the bottom line. We know this from the scientific literature, the abundance of scientific literature, which tells us that dolphins and whales in captivity tend to die from stress-related diseases. Those stress-related diseases are things like ulcers and gastritis, cardiogenic shock, and even psychogenic shock. So we know that most of these diseases are due to stress, either chronic or immediate stress. Many of these animals display both physiological and behavioral indicators of stress, including increased stress hormone levels, the same stress hormone, cortisol, that goes up in us when we're stressed out. And it takes its toll on the body and the immune system. Self-destruction, self-mutilation, and excessive aggressiveness, and stereotypies. These are, sort of repetitive movements that don't really have any purpose except just for kind of self-stimulation, and we see that in human beings who are psychologically disturbed as well. Tilikum is the orca who killed his trainer in 2010, SeaWorld Orlando. He's the focus of Blackfish, and he has been involved in 3 human deaths. Hyperaggression is very common in captivity. It is not found in the wild. Dolphins and whales die young, and they die often in captivity. Wild bottlenose dolphins live to about 50 years in the wild, and but they typically only live to close to that, or the average lifespan, which is about 25. And the question becomes, if captivity involves state-of-the-art veterinary care and husbandry and protection from environmental threats and a good diet, then why are these individuals not living to the maximum lifespan? What's killing them? Orcas experience increased mortality and reduced lifespans in captivity. We know this from a number of studies. Orcas can live to 80 to 100 years old, females, 50 to 60 if they're males. In captivity, they typically don't live longer than about 25 years. Same thing for belugas. They suffer the same stress-related disorders and high mortality rates in aquaria. Wild belugas can live to a maximum of 50 to 60 years, and they typically don't make it past age 25 in captivity. So, just a conclusion, the science provides one inescapable conclusion at this point, that there is really a fundamental incompatibility between who dolphins and whales are and what they are forced to contend with in captivity. It doesn't work, and we know this from the science. And I guess the best way that this was put was by the director of Blackfish, Gabriella Calquithwaite, last night, when she was on Anderson Cooper after Blackfish aired, and she said, the most important thing we've learned about having whales in captivity is that they should not be in captivity. Thank you.